I'll call the Special Regional Council meeting to order. Please be advised that today's meeting is available for the public to attend virtually and is being recorded. Can I get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Dolan, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? Carried. Mr. McQuaig. The delegation regarding our building. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. McQuaig, you can go ahead with your presentation if you'd like.
Okay, so I'll just jump right in. I will share screen, and we have a bit of a PowerPoint going, so we'll see how all that goes. And if
Mr. McQuaig, just one moment. My apologies. I forgot to do our introductions. So, here in council chambers, myself, Councillor Dolan, our CAO, our Deputy CAO, Ms. McIver, and Ms. Hanson. And on the screen, you will see Councillor Gerwing, Councillor Andrews, Councillor Roper.
Okay.
Very well.
Well, thank you for having me. As I say, please bear with us with the technology. I have done this a few times before, and it usually works. So we'll just, hopefully it does. Now, can everyone see the intro sheet? It says Town Square Complex. Yes. Okay, so just a very brief introduction. The project team involved with our presentation involved ourselves as lead consultants, McQuaig and Associates Engineering. We had AES who did the electrical and communication items, and Jensen Hughes who dealt with the code issues. McQuaig and Associates was established in 1992. We have offices in Vancouver, Victoria, Calgary, and Nanaimo. And we've specialized in building envelope, asset management, mechanical, and energy management. AES has offices in Vancouver, Calgary, and Victoria, and they specialize in electrical and communication systems. And Jensen Hughes has 7 offices across Canada, and they're actually worldwide. They have about 65 offices, and they were dealing with the code and life safety review. Very briefly, what I'd like to go over today, you can see the outline and read it as we go, but essentially what the process was, describe the building very briefly, the observations we made, the recommendations we made, and what your options are, expected costs, and essentially what your next steps are. So starting with a very brief project overview. We started back in 2019, which is now almost 2 years ago, and NRM essentially put out an RFP to find people and everything else, and they contacted us. I'm not aware exactly who else was contacted, but we did go in and at stage 2, we set up a contract with them and everything else and arranged to come in and investigate the building. Stage 3, we went through the building in detail. We were there for a few days, looked at all the different parts, presented a report. The report was initially presented in 2020, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, we were originally going to do this presentation many months ago, and then COVID happened, and everything just got put on the back burner for a period of time. So step 4 is you are here. This is where we are now. We're presenting the report. We've lost a few months, but again, nothing critical.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Stage 3, how long did you say that took?
Well, stage 3, the site work itself, we spent a few days. The analysis and everything else probably took several weeks, and there was some back and forth as well with members of the NRRM. So I would say months, really, to put the whole report together.
Site visit was just a couple days, though.
Yep. So. Yeah, it's only one building, but we had 3 people crawling over through every room and on the roofs and everything else. So, hang on, now something's not working. Building history, very briefly. The Town Square complex, we want to look at it very closely as we did. And originally it was purchased, it was built as the Polar Inn in 1978 and damaged due to fire during the construction. And I believe it opened officially in 1980. And you probably know more about the details than I do, but there was a bit of a scandal and a murder involved and everything else. But at the end of the day, the hotel closed down and was purchased by the city of, or by the village of Fort Nelson in 1983. And it was purchased for $1, as I understand. And it was renovated substantially in 1983. And since approximately 1985, there has been targeted repairs, but no real upgrades. Currently, there, as you would be aware, there's a theater, a public library, offices, play school, mental health daycare center, a senior residence in the West Wing. So the building condition report is essentially a non-destructive visual review of the building. We didn't do any destructive testing of any components as part of this report. We looked at all components, the building envelope, the structural systems, interior finishes, site improvements, mechanical systems, both water and heat, electrical communication and alarms, and any code issues that we noted. There's a nice red thing there. Grace Manor is not included. My understanding it's not owned by NRRM, and as such is not part of this report. As part of the report, we included implementation timeframes, which means any work that we recommended that should be done fell into one of three categories. Immediate means it should be done within 1 year or commenced within 1 year. You'll notice the dates there now say commenced by 2022. When we first wrote it, we were hoping they could commence by 2021, but that may not be reasonable with COVID and everything else. Short term is anything that falls within 2 to 5 years, and long term is 6 years or later. So this is essentially where we are. There is a bit of a gap between year 1 and 2, and this is intended. Likely immediate repairs will extend into year 2. So here's where the rubber meets the road. Findings and recommendations. So these are, you don't expect to be able to read all of this, but this is a screen capture from our report. I urge everybody to read the report in detail. There's no way I can go through a 100+ page report in any reasonable time verbally, but I will touch all the highlights and the things that I think are most important, but I urge everybody to literally read it. There is a lot of data there. There's a lot of detail, and you may want to get into it. Immediate repairs, and we will get more detail into all the immediate repairs later. Building envelope repairs, in our report, we called from 10K to 300K. That's a relatively large range, and that's, out of all the items, that's the one was the most unknown at the time of the report. We did note some cracks in the wall along the edge of the theater, and we were concerned there may be an issue with the foundation. As well, the building just down the road, which was contemporary to this building, does have foundation issues, which is an unrelated item at the fire hall. Since then, since this report was written, we have done some testing and everything else, and the short answer is that the foundation is fine, the building is fine. So although there's some cracks in the wall itself, I would expect the building envelope repairs to fall much closer to the 10K range. So that's good news there.
So, Mr. McQuaid, can I just interrupt you for a moment?
Sure.
You've got immediate, and I see you referenced short term in your in some of your notes here.
Yes.
The difference between immediate and short term, if you don't mind.
So immediate, here, we'll go back. We have it. Immediate means basically commence as soon as possible. Short term, you're commencing within 2 to 5 years. And long term is anything 6 years or longer.
Okay, thank you.
And I realize 2 years doesn't seem immediate, but well, actually, we all know why things take time. So in terms of interior repairs, there's 500K, which is a fairly large one. This is for substantial work within, essentially all of the walls have to be gutted to access the wiring and everything else inside the walls. The electrical system is a very large item. There's 9 specific items, and code items is 300K. Now, we will get into those in further detail very shortly. Short-term repairs, so this is 2 to 5 years. Again, there are some building envelope repairs that we can get into. Interior repairs is again another 350K. So the interior repairs are continuing. Site improvements, mechanical, this is the big one in the short term. The mechanical system basically has to be completely replaced. Then we'll be picking up a few remaining electrical items that need doing, and again, addressing some code items. Incidentally, the code item here on the short-term repairs is where we're picking up the access, barrier-free access to the second floor, which is, well, not simple, but it's something that you're probably concerned about. And then long-term repairs, this is the stuff that we feel can wait at least 6 years. It should be done. The roof will require replacement at about $1 million when it's done. The building envelope, there will be some cladding repairs for another $500,000, and window and door replacements. Now we're into the smaller ones. And then the final code and life safety upgrades that we pick up are another third of a million or so. All of these are, it says 6 to 20 years. So if you wanted to, we have an FCI analysis coming up later, but essentially these are things that are not critical immediately. The roof isn't leaking, but you will have to spend it in less than 20 years, that sort of stuff. We have a few different investment scenarios. These are not necessarily a requirement or anything else. It's to give you an idea about what some of your options are. In simple terms, all of the work that we say is immediate or short term, all of it can be moved, and all of it will have impact if you move it. So we're using a facility condition index methodology. For those of you unfamiliar with it, essentially we take the value of the building, and we have valued the building itself at $20.7 million. This would be if you tore down the building and started and built a brand new building from scratch. That's the value of this building as it is now, without any other upgrades. So essentially, the FCI rating levels means if the repairs required to the building are less than 5% of the assessed value of the building, then it's considered a good FCI rating. 10% is fair, 30% is poor, and anything above 30% is critical. Again, these values are not cast in stone, but they're values that we have been basically given by other government bodies. They're pretty common in the industry. So they're not specific. Like if it's 9.9 or 10.1, don't make a huge deal about it. It's not a specific target, but it's something that you should consider. Scenario one, we clearly don't recommend it, but this is the do nothing alternative. So essentially you do nothing. We're saying you should be spending $2.1 million immediately. And if you don't do that, your FCI rating is poor. As it gets worse, if you still don't spend anything in 2 to 5 years, then you should have spent another $3 million and it's still poor. Essentially, once you hit long-term and within 6 years, you've hit the critical stage, which means the building itself has, well, a critical rating means it's in really bad shape. So it's important to consider that these figures are just what you should be spending. Now, if you don't do this work, you will also be spending a bunch of other money doing emergency repairs as you go to fix things that are breaking down. And all of that money effectively is, well, for lack of a better term, is kind of wasted. Scenario two is if you want to keep the building in fair condition. So you spend enough money so you always are at 10% FCI or less. Now, you'll notice that on the left column where it says estimated expenditure, these are what we're recommending immediate, short-term, and long-term. The required scenario expenditure means, okay, reality being what it is, you may not be able to do all that stuff. But if you do the immediate, because the immediate really should be done, and you delay some of the short-term and move it into long-term, then you change that, and then you delay some of the long-term, well, effectively indefinitely. Within 6 years, you'll still be in fair condition. So actually, within 2 years, you'll be in fair, and you'll remain in fair within 6 years. Scenario three means you want to keep the building in good condition. And this is the one, obviously, that takes the most money. And we're effectively spending all of the immediately. You're spending 2/3 of the short term, and you're spending all of the long-term costs right away. So there's a little bit left over there to be done in year 6 to 20, but you can then be in good ranking throughout the life of the building. Very briefly, the major repairs, there's an electrical upgrade for 1.5 million and a mechanical upgrade for 1.8 million. And I just wanted to get into a little more detail as to why. Electrical issues, if you see some of the photos that we have there, generally an electrical system in the last 45 years, ongoing repairs and changes have been done, but they generally involve the cheapest available repair just to fix the problem of the day. A lot of the electrical has effectively reached the end of its service life, so it's not expected to be operating. Some of the electrical was done poorly and with questionable methods. It really wasn't done up to code or anything like that. Some of the electrical doesn't meet code, and it's arguably some of it is unsafe right now. You can see the photo that's front and center where there's wires just hanging down in some areas. The number of issues we've noted require review.
Mr. McQuaid, if I could just stop you there. You see some wires hanging down. Are any of those are household voltage wires? Because those look like telephone wires to me.
Well, that's a communication wire there, but if you look at the one on the ceiling, right, the ceiling there that's hanging down, that is well, it's 120 volt wire. The communication wires are on the left. If you look immediately left to that, you've got a plug that's cracked. Clearly, if you plug anything in there, there's a risk. And if you look immediately to the right where there's a hole there, there's a cable wire. Yeah, you're right. I should have had some other ones.
That's okay. It's a little hard to see there, and I do note that the fire separation isn't in place there. But carry on.
So there are definitely some areas where the wiring, none of it was immediately unsafe that had to be, just rip this wire out because it's unsafe at this time. But a lot of it doesn't meet code, and it comes down to the fact that you have a wire not properly attached and it's just turned off at the breaker. Well, that's really not a great way to go. It's safe for today, but long term, you really should fix it.
And when you say not to code, you mean code today or code when it was constructed? Or both?
Both, yes. So some stuff, the code has moved on, but some stuff when it was done, it didn't meet. Well, unfortunately, you can't quite see it, but if you look, the picture of the drain behind with the black drain pipe, someone ran a wire down the drain pipe. It's just like, it was innovative, but clearly that's not up to code. So there's some things that are just not to code at all and never were. So now I want to be really clear about something. We've asked for all the electrical to be redone, and essentially because all the electrical is questionable right now, and everything we looked at just didn't seem to work the way it should. Out of all the reports we've done, it's extremely rare that we ever ask for everything to be done. Generally, I'm totally the other way, that no, we can view some existing stuff. But essentially, based on the electrical experts we were dealing with, there's very little of the existing system that we have confidence in can work properly. And to try to fix it and open everything up and look at it, once you've opened it up to look at it to see what's going on and why and how, it's actually cheaper just to replace than try to use what we can. Mechanical issues fall into a similar category. Now, this photo is in it's the mental health meeting room, and I can't remember the correct name, but essentially, if you look at the way this room is heated, this is a carryover from the original construction. It was originally construction as a hotel, so this would have been 2 rooms, and they opened it up, and that's great. But now you have heating and cooling available in through-wall units. The first issue, of course, is that these units are quite old. Some of them have been replaced, some of them haven't. They're all at the stage where they would be considered unreliable. But more importantly, that unit is good for a small room of a couple hundred square feet in a hotel. Once you have multiple units in one large room, I guarantee you they would work against each other. So here's 2 units that are, say, 10 feet apart. One of them will be trying to cool the room, and the other will be trying to heat the room. And you will be constantly making adjustments, and they're always fighting against each other. And I can assure you that different areas of the building, some are hot, some are cold, they work, they don't, and all this sort of stuff. The mechanical system is really just not appropriate for the use. It was appropriate for when it was built. The use changed, and the existing mechanical system was reused. So the good news here is that they're all pretty much at end of life anyway. So when you replace them, rather than replace these individually, you should replace the whole system. and then come up with a new system. A couple caveats. The bear pit, where some of you are right now, has a separate system with a rooftop package unit. That system is in good condition and should last several years. It's not that old, and it's reasonable to basically draw a line around the bear pit and say, this room itself has separate issues, separate requirements to the rest of the building, and as such should have a separate system. And there's no reason to change that system. Any overall upgrade would incorporate the existing bear pit system into there. Similarly, I'll call it the adjacent part of the building that's presently with the BC Services and the theater office. I understand there's some upgrade work scheduled for that coming up. Again, that area is a very separate unit. It's a slightly different use than the rest of the building, and it's a standalone. And so that area can be done separately from everything else as well. Whether you want to go ahead with that immediately or not, there's no problem going ahead and doing that first. If you do that first, it'll adjust the number slightly, but not significantly. So once you hear doom and gloom, everybody says, well, why are we even bothering? Let's just tear it down and build new. And that really isn't a good way to go. Actually, sorry, I jumped ahead too early. The cost of all the repairs, all of them together are basically $7 million. So we're talking about a third or less of the value of tearing down and building new. Sure, a new building is great, but if you can spend 1/3 as much, I think you should try to reuse your building. It's also important to note that if you tear down the building, you have no building for all the time it takes to rebuild it, which is going to be a couple of years. So then you have problems with where does everybody go and what do you do with existing services and all that sort of stuff. You can sell the building, and if you sell the building, all you're really doing is putting all of your problems onto someone else. And well, history has shown you bought the building for $1. When you have a building with problems, you never get the existing life. And anyone buying the building to use it will immediately discount the value of all the repairs and whatever they pay for it. So you haven't saved the money. You've got an asset, and if you sell it, you're getting less than what you would have had to repair for it anyway. If you implement the repairs yourself, because of who you are, you have a lot more control as to what the repairs can and must include and must not include and everything else. Also, a lot of these repairs will involve greenhouse gas reduction, or they should anyway. And you may be able to get a bunch of money from the province for that sort of work. If you upgrade the mechanical system, for example, if you upgrade windows. This is a little bit beyond what we have to talk to today, but you should really think about how you would pay for repairs. If you sell it, you have no access to any of those advantages. And then the last question along big questions is, what if the uses changes? Because it's quite reasonable to say, well, we're going to do all this sort of stuff, and we're not even sure if we want to keep using it for a town hall and a daycare, and what if all these things leave? The short answer is the repairs we're talking about, the major repairs anyway, are effectively required no matter what the use is. If you change the use completely radically and you want to put something strange in there, clearly it will cost more, but any reasonable use of the building that would be similar to what it's using, the office space and this sort of stuff, it would all cost the same. So if you change the usage from being a town hall to anything else, and you're selling the building and you move town hall elsewhere, you still have something that you have to spend to make it worth owning. And this is the problem. Next steps. So we're back to our timeline now. If you remember earlier one, you are here, progress to date. You've got a report, you found out what the big issues are, what they might cost. The next step would be to engage stakeholders to consider future uses, occupancy during the renovation, funds and timeline, what your green options are, and any provincial programs. So clearly future uses are well beyond what we can talk about today, but it's on your table. You got to figure out what you want to use this building for in the future. And during any renovations, because there will be renovations, you can occupy the building. There will be impacts, of course. So you may have to be shuffling people around on an ongoing basis. But once you find out what the options are, or what the requirements of the different users are at present, then you get to stage 6 and you hire a consultant, and then he or she gives you what your design options are. And that includes everything from how much can be occupied during the building, what the impacts are for the work. Do you need temporary usage of something? Can you make sure that you hire locals for a lot of the work? Is it really just cost effective to go with the cheapest price? Or what if we go with this, but we get money from Victoria? All of those stuff, the consultants should be conversant in and can help you make all those decisions. And once all that's done, then you implement the changes. And essentially that's the fun part, where the design is finalized and the work happens. And then we have a nice little dance party and step 8, enjoy your fully renovated building. Now, each of those stages, engaging the stakeholders clearly will take months. Once you hire a consultant and explore the options, again, that's months. So even the immediate repairs are at least a year away before you start them, but hopefully you can finish them in less than 2 years for the immediate repairs. And then implementing the changes, you have to go back to your own assessment of what level of FCI is acceptable to you on an ongoing basis, and then figure out, and all that magic happens in step 6 with the consultant. So that is, in very brief format, the entire report. I'm open to questions. I would encourage questions. And I have a copy of the report if you have any specifics about it as well. So.
I have a question.
Sure.
So Lorraine Gerwing here. I don't know if you can see us or not.
Well, actually, I can turn off I can stop the share.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. So as you were speaking, I realized that the other part of the building that doesn't belong to us, but we are connected to it. So let's assume that we went ahead and we made whatever repairs or improvements that we deem necessary. But that part of the building doesn't, because if we don't own it, then we have no control over it. So how would that impact, or no upgrades, how would no upgrades impact the integrity of the part of the building that we would be renovating?
So my understanding, that portion of the building belongs to a provincial body, but regardless, it doesn't belong to you.
Right.
So as part of the electrical upgrades, we have assumed you will run a separate electric service to your building, separate from the electrical service to that building, because they should be separated anyway. So that's one of the upgrades, which means all of a sudden you're completely independent electrically. Electrically? Your electrical services are completely independent, and so now you have no tie-in. You can then have the option, whether you want to or not, to have access from one building to another. As part of the repairs, you can literally close the wall and never get access between them. If you do, it must be a 2-hour rated wall and all these sort of things to meet fire code, but you can do it. And then further, you can, at your own discretion, you can have the fire alarm systems from one talk to the other or not. All of those are options. Personally, I would probably just draw a line and say, this is no longer a problem. We're going to have a line between it, and they're separate buildings, and that's it. Because it just makes everything cleaner. All of the repairs on that side have to be done by someone else. If that building catches fire, firewalls being what they are, you should be reasonably safe. The fire hall is 4 blocks away. You should be fine protecting your building. I'm not saying you should just look at a senior's house burning and not do anything, but at the same time, it is a separate building, it has separate use, it has separate owners. Build a wall and call it a day. Right now, they're tied together. Once we separate the services, you can do whatever you want, and these are one of many options that will come up during the design phase.
Are there any other questions for Mr. McQuaid? Okay. Hearing none, then I guess I will thank you, Mr. McQuaid, for your presentation, unless there's any other comments.
I have one other comment just to let you know that we are also involved in looking into the fire hall. We've got some tests running and everything else. The initial review we have there has shown that the fire hall can stay occupied, but there are some issues that have to be fixed. So it can keep working virtually forever, well, for decades, in its present form with some relatively harmless repairs in my mind. Because I know there was there was talk that had to be literally torn down or relocated, and that's not the case based on what we've learned. So that's
Councilor Roper.
So
yeah, I just have a question for Mr. Barry. We've heard before that we have like a policy, it's called run to fail. And I just wanted to get a little bit more information on that, how that works and maybe how that's impacting, you know, the current building.
So it's not necessarily a policy of run the fail, Councilor Roper. It's more of the direction from council previously, and the reason why we are today with this process with McQuaig and with Jack here has to do with a decision. So I'll back up a bit. Back in the day, there was discussions at the time to actually move town hall, and it was all part of the discussions with the emergency services building and that type of stuff, to have that as one bigger building. And there was actually some initial designs and discussions that were occurring again regarding, and I'm going to go back, say probably, I'll rough it up, 8 years maybe, around potential town hall design at the time. That, of course, started to dwindle when the economic situation in the community started to take place. So what happened is there was a decision made to provide, or for this building here, was to provide the maintenance to keep the upkeep of the building. Basically, the direction was to keep the lights on, keep it operating, but do not reinvest in the building until you determined you are going to keep the building. Right? So that's what triggered this process. So that now council, so the intent today is not for council to make any decisions today. This is an information process. Further information will come back to council, but this was the kind of the start of the discussion. So council is going to have those discussions to say, do you want to invest in this building? And if so, this is the steps and the various options as Jack had mentioned. So we have basically been maintaining the building to keep it operating, repairing as necessary, replacing as necessary, but it's more of a reactive approach versus a proactive approach. Any of the funds, so what we've been doing though is obviously putting funds annually away with the intent to either A, reinvest in this building or in another facility. So that's that building and facilities reserve plan. So the good news is that if council elected to take their route to maintain this facility, currently that reserve policy, or sorry, that reserve account has about $9.3 million in it. So there's funds available. It's not like council has a tough decision to make regarding where do they find the funds. The funds have been put away because we knew that we were going to have to come to this decision this day, but council has to make an informed decision. In order to do that, we had to go through this process here, right? To say what are those options? How do you balance those options in regards to that? And as Jack had mentioned, one example is it's $7 million or $7.1 million if you did everything on the recommendations. That's a third of the cost if you were to tear this building down. If you're to look at another facility as an option, and yes, there are potential buildings in town that might suit, but again, you'd have to reinvest into that building because you can't just move into it. So you get the purchase price and the cost associated with changing that building, and then you're still left with this facility here, which what you do with it. We've paid $1 for it. We might get 50 cents for it at the end of the day, all honesty. And then, of course, there's the other tenants in this building too. It's not just the town. It's town complex. So it's the theater, the Service BC, the play school, and the mental health and addiction. So all that's part of this process. So that said, to answer your question, I want to give a bit of history. But to answer your question is, that direction was previously given to staff, and we back in the day to maintain this facility, but not put any significant reinvestment into it until council had the ability to make a decision what they want to do with the facility.
I think the number for the center was 200,000, but $100,000, it doesn't really matter. Councillor Roper, did you have another question?
Yeah, just thank you for that brief history, Scott. That was very informative. I see a great potential for this building, possibly not as a town hall in the future, but as something. And you know, that $7 million price tag. I mean, if we were to offset that with grants and subsidies, work programs, I think it could be a lot of investment that gets put back into the community. But on the other hand, I also see a possible new building for town hall. I think a town hall should be a modern facility, something that you look at and you know that your community is modernized. So I kind of like both options of having a potential future newer town hall that will take care of future needs. But I also don't want to do that at the detriment of this building, because this building right now is really, you know, it's the heart and soul of the town. And it has a lot of use and a lot of people use it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussions for sure.
Are there any other questions for Mr. McQuaid? Councillor Andrews.
Not specifically for Mr. McQuaid. So if Councillor Gerwing has some specific, I'll let her go. All right. I was actually kind of caught off guard a lot looking over this report and seeing all these pictures. First thing that jumped into my head was neglect. And that's why I asked for maintenance figures and stuff. We've spent almost $260,000 on maintenance in the past 3 years on this building. And it took 3 people a couple days to find some actual safety and exposed issues that I feel our maintenance should have had taken care of already. To me, I'm finding it very hard to look at and be willing to spend more money when it looks like complete neglect from our staff on this matter. And I'm hoping I'm wrong, and I'm sorry if I'm reading the report wrong. It's just how I'm seeing this all.
And I appreciate your comments, Councillor Andrews. At the end of the day, I mean, some of these items that were brought forward as part of the report are not new items. They're items that have been there for years. It's not something that's just materialized over the past few years. And these discussions date back 8-9 years ago with previous councils and concerns with this facility, and the direction that was given. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, a lot of the recommendations and everything that are in here, we like trying to drink water from a fire hose, to be honest with you. There's a significant amount of, as you can see, even in the short term, a lot of work that's required that we just don't have that capacity internally. And how much would you spend on the facility? Again, I mean, the fire suppression issues, the alarm issues, the electrical issues have been discussions that have occurred in the past. And again, it was how much, you know, where do you start and where do you stop once you crack it open? And that's the challenge, to be honest with you. I mean, you know, I look at it and you read the report, and it is disturbing to read. But at the same time, it's not surprising, I'll be honest with you, because this facility and the way it is, and a lot of the issues have been there for many years. And there's some cases that didn't even, when the work was done in the 80s, didn't meet the code of the day at that time. When you look at the comparisons in some of the charts in the report, so. I'd like to, you know, I'll go on record to say that, you know, the amount of work that is required would be like drinking the water from a fire hose. And where do you start and where do you stop without having to systematically go?
Councillor Gerwing.
So I guess my comment and question and statement would be, so next steps. So I don't want to see, like, obviously we're not making any decisions today, but I would like for us to set up some sort of a process that we know, I don't know, in 1 month, we're going to have whatever the next step that we deem. Like you know, I want to keep this on the front burner. I don't want to see it fall back into the land of COVID and, you know, what's happening next for us. I think that this is really important that we keep this on the rails. So how do we do that?
Our intent, and there's further conversations with council that need to happen, and the intent would be to bring back another report to council, but to have that further discussion, I would highly recommend, if you haven't had an opportunity to kind of go through that report and take a look at it. And of course, we've had lots of discussions with Mr. McQuaig here in terms of some certain options, and again, this is not what we do for a living, of course, when you look at this process. So, significant hand-holding and help is required here for, either if it's other organizations or someone like McQuaig. That's why we brought them in to help us with the fire hall too. They were already working with them. We had some good work with them, and when we looked at some of the recommendations with the fire hall, some of the information at the fire hall, we knew that we needed some additional help, and that's where Jack came in and his team and came up, and it wasn't necessarily as bad as we originally thought, and worked through some processes. So moving forward, we need that assistance, and to map out that process with council with some firm timelines in terms of decision makings, and then because the reality is that we have done some investigative work, but to proceed council with that, even that short-term work, immediate work, I should say, there needs to be decisions made by council sooner than later, and to do that, there's work in between that. So for sure, we have to keep this momentum going, and that would be the intent for sure.
Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that staff and finance, however it worked, have got that money set aside, because it does make decisions a whole lot simpler. That's awesome. These short-term, immediate projects, especially some of the safety hazards, I would like to see us go forward as quick as possible. We have the money sitting there. So yeah, I really like to see this move forward. I really enjoyed the report, aside from it catching me off guard, but yeah, the information's here now, and now's what the best thing we can do is deal with it. And I know we've got a team that can do that.
Councillor Roper.
If we were to proceed with, say, the short-term recommendations, I can't remember the exact figure, something around $2 million. What are we eligible for to offset that cost? Can we dip into the IDCA? Are there government grants for renewal? What could we do to make this cost less as we go?
So it's IDCA fundable, but that's where the money's, so what we've done each year, Councillor Roper, with regards to the IDCA piece, is this is part of our whole asset management program. So part of our IDCA program and our annual infrastructure development plan with the province has outlined funding required for town hall complex. And part of that discussion was we don't have a final decision in terms of what path we're taking. So that's the reason why we've been able to build such a sufficient amount in that fund. So that that 9.3 million has been, as each budget year over the previous years, we've been able to take a significant amount. We've reinvested in certain areas. There's certain things that have occurred that we've pulled money for, as that building and facilities fund, but the remainder's gone in. So the IDCA is, it's part of it, and it's clearly outlined in our program with the province. Other funding mechanisms, don't know offhand exactly what's there, but there's always certain opportunities that come up. We've had two grant requests, applications that have gone in, two separate grant applications that have gone in for the Fire Hall Public Works building this year, for example, the past few months to help offset that. We would do the same thing with this facility, and then of course Jack also mentioned the tax, the gas tax piece or greenhouse gases. There's all kinds of, when I say all kinds, there's various grant opportunities. It's just what are they? What's the value of them? What's the timeline and the conditions apply? But we would look for all of those. The good news is even though we'd look for anything to offset those costs, council doesn't have to try to figure out a way to come up with the funding if they want to do immediate work, because we do have funds available, and that was the intent of putting that money away, was to be able to do that, to do this. If council said today they wanted to proceed, we could proceed. It's not like you're trying to figure out where do you find the funding to do so.
So is there any appetite around the table to take a close look at the immediate things, to bring those back first of all, so that we can all have a look at what exactly we're looking at here in the immediate needs, and if there's any comment, questions, we can get clarification on that. I note that there's just about a dozen items here on the immediate, and maybe we can get staff to bring us back a report that maybe give us a little bit more information on simply the immediate stuff, a little wider than that. Councillor Roper?
And included in that report, I would like to see how much of that work can be done by our local community, local businesses, local tradespeople. I'd like to know how much of that will go directly to the community.
I think some of the items on this immediate list are very short. I mean, emergency lighting, I don't think this is anything that we have to get really in-depth about. We obviously need the emergency lighting and it has to be done. So I don't mean that we're going to have to spend hours and hours on each one of these items, but just to bring it back in maybe a bite-sized piece here that we can just have a look at and we can check off and we can give staff the go-ahead to get those things done. And maybe we can move ahead at a pretty expedient pace here. And like you say, Councillor Roper, we want to make sure we get local work on this. Mr. McQuaid?
I don't want to I don't want to interrupt anything you're saying, but I think I have to wade in a little bit, and I'm going to make a couple statements here. Run to fail is not a bad thing. Run to fail is an active decision so that we will not be doing piecemeal repairs that will become redundant when we fix something bigger later. You're looking at big repairs in 2 to 5 years, probably. Be very careful about picking up a few early ones and just doing this and just doing that, because to be blunt, that's what you've been doing for 20 years. And that's why we end up where we are. There's nothing wrong with it. And to be honest, I've seen buildings way worse than this one. Trust me, it's not bad, but it's old and it's time. And please don't start trying to piecemeal things until you have a plan. You need a big plan first. And then absolutely you can say, part of the big plan is to put LED lighting in this room. We can do that next week. And part of the big plan is to do that, and we can do that. And we have a local guy that absolutely all of that should happen. But it's really important to consider the big plan before you focus on the small items, even if the small items seem simple. And sorry, it's a bit of a rant, but I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, Mr. McQuaid, and we appreciate your insight in that. As Councillor Andrews had pointed out, some of this stuff is a hazard. It's dangerous, and I think from council's point of view, we need to fix those things, so that nobody gets hurt. So we need to do that. And some of the other safety items here in this immediate thing, probably should be addressed sooner rather than later. But there's nothing wrong with coming up with a long-term plan and seeing how the immediate, the midterm, and the long-term dovetail into that plan. So I take your advice, and but we want to make sure that, of course, our staff and patrons to the town center are safe first of all. Councillor Andrews?
Yeah, I just wanted to say again, thanks. I appreciate that, Mr. McQuaid, because the first thing that popped in my head was fixing emergency lights. Oh, well, let's fix them, but now we got to change all our electrical in a year, and we got to change the lights again. So yeah, having that full plan, putting the horse before the cart, and making sure it's all done right. Yeah, that's definitely a good piece of advice. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Mr. McQuaid?
So
very well. Any other comments? Councillor Gerwing?
So do
Go
we
ahead.
want to set some sort of a timeline for whatever the next steps would be identified, and then an associated timeline so that council could possibly have an idea as to when we would next be meeting or around this project?
Ms. Berry?
Yeah, so what I foresee, if council's fine with it, is the next meeting could be a little tight, but to bring a report back to the next meeting, we need to go and have discussions around, and again, it's that big picture approach did we lose Councillor Gerwing? Because she asked the question, I want to make sure. Okay. Okay, no, I want to make sure.
Had a dog issue. I didn't think you all needed.
That's okay. Yeah, as I was saying previously, I mean, this is not something that we can do on our own. And again, and we can't piecemeal it. So the reason for having this report and bringing and having this discussion with council is so the next step would be discussing what that plan would look like, and we would use expertise like Mr. McQuaig to help build that plan. That's what they do. That's what they're in business for, and this is why we were able to get, because this is the first time. We've had lots of piecemeal reports back in the day. We knew that we had poor fire suppression, and there was costs associated with that. We knew there was electrical issues, there was a report to that. We knew we had issues regarding egress to the building and accessibility, but nothing was ever pulled together. Is the reason why we went through this process. So the next step would be to have that plan built with timelines that link into if council was to proceed with this, and that's part of that discussion. So the next step would be to bring a report back to council, discuss in terms of the direction you want to go, which will also include who do we want to do that with and how do we want to get to that stage. Council needs to make those decisions. Is it to continue on with Mr. McQuaig, or is it to reach out and do another RFP, for example? And then that would also build that consultant, that group would also help build the timelines and build that map and that roadmap for council in terms of those. To include then the options that were in the report as an example. Is it, what do you want that FCI to be? Do you want it to be, poor, fair, or good over the next 20 years? So that's all part of those discussions, but it's not something that we're going to circle back in 6 months' time. We're talking weeks. We could get a report back. I don't want to scare Harvey and Luann and say we'll have a report at the very next meeting, but I'll chat with them, and if not, it'll be the meeting after for sure.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
If not, at the minimum, even just a discussion. I envision us, for example, going in camera at the next meeting to discuss opportunities regarding the consulting piece and how we want to proceed that way.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Any other comment? Very well, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting. Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Roper. All those in favor? Carried, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much, Mr. McQuaid, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one last thing to note, the audio has been a lot better the past couple meetings.
What was that?